Today's webinar is oriented for our dear clients from China. It doesn't matter where you are. You can be in China, you can be now around the world, you can be in Canada. We dedicated this webinar to the process of transition from temporary resident of Canada, if you happen to be here or your children are here, study or just vacationing, how to transition yourself to permanent resident of Canada and become Canadian. That's the topic of today's webinar.
今天的研讨会是为我们亲爱的中国的客户举办的。无论你在什么地方，你可以在中国，也可以在世界各地，你也可以在加拿大。我们这次的会专门来讨论怎么过渡，从一个临时居民身份转换成为加拿大永久身份。如果是你或者是你的孩子刚好在这里，那么我们会特意来解释怎么来做这样一个转变。
Okay, first of all, immigration to Canada is a very complicated process. Doesn't matter how people prescribe it or present it. We're talking about more than 80 immigration programs currently available. So it is hard to select the right one.
移民是一个非常复杂的过程，无论别人是怎么来介绍，或者是怎么来宣传，或者怎么来展示这个移民的项目，但是无论怎么样，移民都是一个特别复杂的法律的过程。
They usually differ between eligibility criteria, how application will be processed, and timelines also different.
那么通常他们在资格标准的和申请方面有各种不一样的。
It is very critical that you have consultant or lawyer who will offer you not what you know, but what they can offer based on your background.
我们在寻找移民顾问的时候，通常不应该是说你想要做什么，你能获得什么，而是要看这个律师或者移民顾问他能够提供什么样的，他们有什么样的经验，他们可以提供什么样的帮助给你。
And this is very important. Why? Because when people come into us, for example, and say, my friend or my neighbor or my relative use this program, can I do this?
有的时候有人跑过来会跟我说，这是我的朋友或者是我的亲戚，他们是通过这种程序来的，那我可以用同样的吗？
Many consultants, many lawyers say, yes, let's do that.
有些很多的移民顾问或者是律师，他们说是的，可以，我们可以这样做。
But this is not right. It's like you come into a doctor and saying, I have a headache, and my friend has a headache, and you give him these pills, and I need those pills.
那就很简单，比如说，如果你去看医生说我的头很痛，那我的朋友头也很痛，那他们给他服这个药，我可不可以跟他吃一样的药？
So in real life, would you do that to yourself? Of course not.
那如果在真正的生活当中，你可以这样子吗？当然不可以。
That's why it's very important to hire those consultants, those lawyers who can offer something unique based on your background, on your life, not neighbors, not friends, not relatives, your unique life.
所以你应该要找一些移民律师，或者他们可以根据你的状况、你的背景、你的特殊的状况，你是独一无二的这样的情况，来根据你来量身定做。
So let's see how it can work and what is not working.
我们来看哪些可以实现，哪些不能够。
Many families, not only from China, but from all over the world, send kids here to study, and then they hope that kids will stay here on PR.
很多的家长他们会把他们的孩子送到加拿大来上学，那么当然他们希望他们能够留在加拿大。
And it's not bad because it's one of those programs that work.
那这也不是很糟糕，因为有一些这样的程序是可以的。
But recently, it became more and more complicated because Government of Canada decided to what we call clean up the program from frauds, from those who abuse the program. So it's becoming more and more complicated to study and then immigrate.
但最近情况变得越来越复杂，因为加拿大政府决定清理这些该计划的一些欺诈行为，所以他们就要把这些，他们要清除这些，所以让留学移民变得特别复杂。
Not only complicated, but it's also expensive. Let's explore this.
那么它不光是复杂，而且它也很昂贵。那我们来看一下。
Let's say you have a child who starts study in Canada from, for example, high school.
比如说，如果你的孩子从高中开始，讲下这个我们来讲的生活的费用，因为你想照顾你的孩子，但是如果刚开始从高中的6万加币的这样的一个3年的学费，
But students after finishing high school cannot immigrate to Canada, so they have to go to college or university. How much that cost? Well,
那
we're talking about UBC, for example, 50,000 per year at least.
那我们的孩子如果只是高中毕业了，他显然是不可能成为移民的。那他们可能要去上一个大专或者是一个本科。那我们以 UBC 来作为例子来说，UBC 的一个国际生在 UBC 的学费大概1年是5万块钱。
We're talking about bachelor degree, for example, and UBC is not the most expensive university. For 4 years, only tuition would be about $200,000.
那么 UBC 它还不是最贵的学校啊，那大概的4年下来是20万。
So let's say tuition only for 7 years of your child's life, 7 years.
如果我们只是谈到学费的7年的学费下，
So technically we're talking about 260,000 only on tuition, plus let's say about 40,000 annual maintenance or living expenses. And just multiply by that, it will be almost $1 million you spent on your child.
除了费用之外，我们不要说每年这个大概可能要4万块钱的各种的费用也要。
What if your child is Canadian? What if you take care of Canadian status first and then arrange study? Well, domestic student fee is about $8,000 a year.
那如果你想反过来，如果你能够先让你的孩子成为加拿大本地的人，他们的学习他们的费用大概是多少？
So we're just giving you an example. If you save money on tuition alone, you will save almost $250,000.
如果你是加拿大的孩子来学习的，你会节省how much money you mentioned?
So it's $250,000, but add all the domestic expenses, all the living expenses, we're talking about saving of about $500,000.
如果加上这些各种的费用加起来，我们大概可以节省大概是一半50万加币的这样的费用可以节省。
It sounds simple, but at the same time, we're talking about a situation when people technically just switch one part, study or immigrate. If you immigrate first, you can save money. So let's say you still insist on sending your child to school. What happens after? What kind of avenue your child will face, or you, if you study first as an international student and then try to immigrate? So technically speaking, we have 3 options or three criteria. We're talking about challenges of becoming Canadian after study. It's hard.
那也就是说，如果你只是坚持要让你的孩子来先要留学，完了学习完了之后，他们所面临的这个挑战会有些什么呢？
And why it is hard? Because express entry is, well, it's technically hard because more and more students trying to immigrate and people who live overseas also trying to immigrate, and express entry points growing faster than people can catch up with them.
那我们说快速通道当然是一个最直接最好的通道，但是无论是境内的还是越来越难，增长的难点的速度比我们能赶上的速度要快很多。
Of course, some people heard about provincial nominee programs and different programs that help students to stay in Canada, for example, Canadian Experience. But it works very well if you have low points on express entry and low unemployment rate because people can find a job, but it's very hard.
如果你有获得加拿大经验，如果你的分数足够的，你也是可以，但是还是很困难。
So technically speaking, if we take a look at possibilities of most available pathways, we're talking about 3 categories: express entry, provincial nominee, and we have startup visa program for those talented young professionals.
那如果我们要来讲这3种最常用的从中国想转成加拿大的3种方式的，一个刚才快速通道、创业移民和雇主担保的省提名计划。
If we look closer to express entry, just imagine your child finish university or you finish university if you study, then you face express entry. And express entry recently, since pandemic, for the last 5 years, including pandemic time, we're talking about extremely high point system.
如果你考虑你的孩子他 大学毕业完了之后，或者是你在加拿大上学完了之后，你们都要面临同样一个挑战，就是可以快速通道。但是自从疫情之后，这个挑战变得越来越难。我们可以看到目前的分数变得超级额外的。
Technically speaking, is it possible to immigrate through express entry? Yes, but I can tell you in reality, it's extremely high risk because it's very hard to reach 529. If you calculate your points, you're losing points for age, you're losing points for education, you're losing points for lack of experience. It's a very, very complicated path and not reliable.
快速通道是不是没可能？当然是有可能。但是如果你看到这个分数的系统，失去了年龄的分数，你可能教育的分数也不够，英语的分数也不够，经常难，要达到529分很难，风险在这儿。
Let's take a look at provincial nominee program. It used to be very simple and direct.
现在我们看一下省提名计划，在过去的其实是很简单、很容易的，
especially for graduates.
尤其是对刚毕业的国际生。
But currently, it became very hard for students to find a job, not to mention the job that will support them to stay in province.
那现在我们说，因为他们毕业完了之后，首先面临的挑战是找工作，更不用说工作公司要来支持他移民。
So technically, it exists on paper, but it doesn't mean you can immigrate with this program.
那么从理论上来讲，它是可以的，但是并不代表你就能够获得。
And it takes a long time by itself.
而且本身这个程序的时间是很漫长的。
That's why, not because we push in this program only, but because it is the best program, it's a startup visa.
我们并不是说我们只是做创业移民，那只是因为创业移民它就是最好的选择，是因为它本身这个项目是最好的。
So let's objectively explore why.
我们来解释一下它为什么。
Why it is the best?
为什么它是最好的？
Well, first of all, we have to pay attention to certain benefits of becoming Canadian first.
首先，
So if you're a parent and you have young children and you're thinking about sending them to Canada, not only they have to be here for 8 to 10 years trying to be Canadians, but also cost is extremely high compared to study cost for Canadians.
如果你把你的孩子学习8到10年，它的成本是非常高的。
So family, if you immigrate, definitely have benefits of permanent residency. And with PR, your child doesn't have to work somewhere in McDonald's, somewhere just to be employed. They can find any job they want or open the business. So basically, we just have to emphasize that Canadian family enjoy all the benefits of being Canadian. No restrictions on location, on work, or study, or opening business.
那成为加拿大永久居民，它的好处不光是这个学费要低廉，何况就是说它没有受到地域的限制，他们在就业、他们在学习，在各方面都没有任何的限制。
What we're trying to say is simple. If you immigrate first and then send your children to school, especially if you have not one but few children, it becoming more and more economically beneficial.
如果当你是父母，你有你的孩子，如果你能够先获得加拿大永久居民身份，然后送你的孩子来上学，不要说是你有多个孩子，那当然是更经济，从经济上来讲。
If we're talking about startup visa, people ask me all the time if Canadian government support the program. Yes, it is.
创业移民项目，那很多人问我，加拿大是不是支持这个项目的？政府是不是支持这个项目？当然是。
Last year, for example, the government of Canada increased the amount of visas processed within a year 3.5 times.
加拿大政府用1年的时间内，从2024年呢，增加了3.5倍的数量。
It means people coming into PR processing now processed faster within a year.
那也意味着说，其实在这1年当中，进入到项目的整理的时间变得更快了。
Processing time is a very sensitive topic. For example,
我们讲到整理时间是非常敏感的一个话题。
For example, if people look at the time published on Canadian government website, they see this number, 39 months.
那我们看到在移民部的官方的网站上看到的整理的时间是39个月。
But why they publish this time and what it means?
那为什么他们显示是39？那意味着什么？
Well, technically, it's just a fact or let's say measurement of the longest processed file up to date, looking back.
那么我们可以这么来理解，它这个项目从今天开始往回头看，他们最长的整理的时间是39个月。
It's just the fact that somebody in the world was in process up to date for 39 months. It's justification of the fact of already in process files.
那么也就是说，在这个世界上，在过去的历史上，有些人的 case 他已经有39个月，等待了39个月，证明他是已经存在，确实有这样的案例，是最长的时间达到39个月。
There is nothing here that will indicate time going forward. So the reason I emphasize this, it's very critical because sometimes people asking me, how can we show that we have cases shorter than that, or why time is faster? Because we practice this, we see it in action.
那有些人会来问，为什么你们到底有多长时间？那我们看到的，我们在实践过程当中，我们的时间是这样的一个时间，6到12个月，这是我们在实际的工作当中，我们在处理的案子中，我们的时间是花了这么多的时间。
Looking at the official processing time, it's like driving a car, looking in the rear view mirror.
我们看在网上公布的这个时间，就像你在开车，你看镜子看后面，
It's not practical.
它并不是实际的。
What is practical is to look at the real time that people have actually in process. It takes about 6 to 12 months.
那么实际的，什么叫实际的时间？就是说我们在真正在处理的过程当中，我们的操作的过程当中，实际所发生所用的时间。
Sometimes time goes little longer because people have complicated background, form applications. Sometimes they have lived in different countries. The background is a very complicated thing.
因为有每个人的背景不一样，有些国家的状况不一样，所以会有的时间的不同。
Well, we always encourage people to check real time, real people, and Tina is very helpful to assist our Chinese clients.
我们要来看，要跟真正的人去工作。Tina 是帮助我们中国市场。
And if you have any questions, you can talk to her first. But Tina is our moderator for Anyvisa China, and we're really proud to have Tina on our team.
那你们有什么问题，你们都可以先要跟 Tina 来谈。我们很骄傲有她跟我们一个团队。
But if you go on the website, you can find multiple testimonials about us, about our team, successful clients. We're not just saying something, we're doing this.
你可以到我们的网站上会看到我们的客人，我们的见证，这是不是我们在说什么？这是我们做的。
Okay, so why startup visa is so popular? Why it's so good? Let's look at the requirements.
现在我们回过头来讲，为什么创业移民这么好？
Well, first of all, for people who doesn't have English as a native language, it's very hard to pass high level of required tests for English.
那么对我们的英语不是母语的国家的客人来讲，要达到高水平是很难的。
For startup visa, it's a minimal requirement. It's CLB5. If you're familiar, it's very low. It's almost the minimal language knowledge.
对创业移民来讲，它的要求其实是非常低，是最基本的要求，只有5级，谁都可以达到的。
Settlement funds required at the minimal level. So you don't have to make a huge investment. You just have to show that you have minimal settlement funds, just like students or workers.
关于安置费的也是最少的，因为就像学生一样，像其他的移民，最基本的、最低的安置费的要求。
Of course, you have to solidify and find support from designated organization, but that's what we provide.
当然，你这里面投资机构，那这个是我们来帮助的。
And you definitely have minimal educational requirements. Basically, if you finish just high school, that's all right.
那么对教育来讲，它也是很低的。如果你只要是高中毕业够了。
Some people concerned about business experience because it's a business program, but this program, startup, does not require a business experience. You can be an employee.
那我们讲到关于最低的商业的经验的要求，那有些人你可能根本就没有商业经验，因为这是创业移民，所以他并不对你的商业的经验，你可以没有任何的商业经验，你可能一直都是
Of course, the program based on innovative idea or know-how or pattern, but we always work with people and helping them to find that idea or create it together. So it's not that difficult if you're working with very experienced team.
那当然，这个项目的核心的就是你还要有一个创新的想法。很多的人都不知道有什么样的想法，但这个创新的想法并不是你们想的那么难。如果你能够跟非常有经验的公司来工作，我们可以来帮你开发你的创新的想法。
And of course, you have to create a qualifying business, and that's what included in our services. We create in business, we maintain and develop it together.
那就是你要符合资格的商业的企业，那这个我们会来教你怎么来做，我们来支持你，来帮助你，这个是包含在我们的服务范围之内，所以这个不是什么问题。
But the most important factor is there is no selection points. You don't have to compete with anyone.
他没有分数，所以他并不需要你跟别人来竞争。
People really missing this, but let me repeat, no competition.
很多人并不了解它的分数的这个意义，因为没有分数不打分就意味着你没有竞争。
No competition like Express Entry, no competition like Provincial Nominee. This is the only program where you don't have to meet certain points.
这是唯一的，它不像快速通道那样的对分数的排分，也不像雇主担保省提名计划的那种跟分数的有个基本的要求。这里没有分数，所以没有说你要有一个分数的这个标准会成为一种障碍。
So people usually ask how we achieve our results when we have 100% success rate and everything. I can tell you how.
再问我你们怎么可能，你们怎么能做到100%的成功率呢？现在我来告诉你，我们是怎么做到的。
We usually process people by addressing 4 major areas.
我们通常在做整理的时候是从4个方面。
We check first if people actually admissible. Inadmissibility can be divided in 3 categories: medical, criminality, misrepresentation, any reason that government can reject.
客人他是不是属于不可接受性？不可受理是分成3个部分，一个是医疗健康，第2个是犯罪，第3个是虚假陈述和误导。
Of course, we check financial ability to be able to handle the program because we have legal fees, business development fees and expenses, and we have settlement funds requirements. So we check everything before we start.
我们要检查关于你的能力能不能要，因为你需要法律的费用，你需要在运营 business 所需要的费用，你还要满足安置费的。当然，我们在一开始之前，我们先来做评估这些。
And again, remember, we don't address people as cookie cutter, as standard. We view every single person individually because you are unique and you deserve it.
我们在评估的时候是根据每个人实际的状况，因为每个人是不一样的。我们根据你每个人，因为你就是独一无二的那个人，所以我们按照你独一无二的，我们来帮你来做评估，来做指导。
For example, we're talking about what interests you in Canada, why you want to move here, not somewhere, and where you're from, and what motivates you.
我们会来讨论你的背景，你是什么？你为什么想要来加拿大？你在什么地方？你为什么？你对什么感兴趣？
We're definitely talking about innovative idea. If you have any patents or maybe develop technology, it's all individual, and we address all these areas before we start.
我们会要了解你有哪些特别的技术，你有些什么专利，或者说你有什么这个原型。那我们在开始之前，我们先把这些东西先了解。
Of course, like I mentioned, we have to find support from designated organizations.
那正如我们说的，那我们首先要找到什么样的投资机构来支持。
It can be venture capital fund, it can be angel, it can be business incubator. We normally work with angels, and I will explain why.
这里投资机构有3种类型，一个是风险投资机构、天使投资机构和商业孵化器。那么我们通常是跟天使来合作，我会来解释为什么。
Venture capital funds usually working with very developed businesses, like companies that have attraction on the market, some developed product, maybe sales.
那么风险投资基金，他们通常要支持的，比如说你已经有很成熟的产品，你可能已经进入市场的。
Business incubators, they don't provide any support. So technically speaking, people act on their own, and that's why the highest level of refusal is for incubators.
那孵化器他们给到的支持是最少的，基本上你要懂得所有的事情都是你自己来做，所以孵化器因为它支持给的少，所以它有最高的拒签率。
Angels support enough, but also support those who doesn't have any business besides idea, and then start building business together.
天使它是刚刚好，它给的支持，尤其是它能够从想法开始来支持，它可以从你只是一个想法来开始，跟我们一起来孵化这个项目。
And that's why we like it, because we work with angels.
所以这是我们很喜欢的，所以我们通常是跟天使来工作。
Letter of support or commitment certificate is a very simple document if you think about it. It's very critical to understand. What stands behind it is more complicated, but the document itself, it's very simple.
支持性本身，我们讲到看起来其实是非常简单的。
Remember that I mentioned, probably not, but I have to tell you another benefit of the startup visa program. For example, you want to share the cost and you have couple partners. Well, then your personal cost can be less. You benefit from cooperating with other partners.
创建一个公司，有大家一起对一起来有些费用是可以分摊的，那么这样你们总体的费用会减少。
Up to 5 people can participate in one team.
那么最多可以5个人一起来参加，组一个团队来参加一个项目。
You don't have to share your expenses with anyone if you can afford it, but if you want to participate and save a little bit, then you can.
你当然不是一定说要跟别人来组队，但是如果你能够有足够的经济的能力，单独来执行也是可以的。你并不是一定要组队。
It is very important to understand. Startup visa is not passive investment scheme. It's an active operational business program.
然后一定我们要理解，创业移民它不是一个被动的投资的项目，它是一个要积极经营的这样的一个业务的一个项目。
So what we do together, we create the business and we run the business, and then we decide what to do with the business after people land.
我们
I'm
是
Canadian.
我们一起来运行这个项目，直到你拿到。